All right, we're going to be moving on to the second section of our Unit 6 test review. The first part here, we're going to be evaluating the special angles here. So tan of 210, we're going to have to use our unit circle here. So hopefully you're able to fill out a unit circle. Again, if you remember, tan is equal to our y coordinate divided by our x. So 210 degrees, that would be negative 1/2 divided by negative root 3 over 2, which is going to be the same thing as negative 1/2 times 2 over negative 2 over root 3. These will cancel out as well as the negatives, the 2's and the negatives. So that's going to leave me with 1 over root 3. And again, we are going to want to rationalize our denominator. So we're going to multiply our numerator and denominator by root 3. So that will leave me with root 3 divided by 3. Next, we're going to move on to cosine of 1020. Now, what I should want to do is to try to get a reference angle here, not reference angle, a coterminal angle that would fit on our unit circle. So I can take 1020, and if I subtract 360 from it, that will give me 660. So I can go ahead and go for even further from there, actually. So then if I subtract another 360 from it, I'll get 300. So that means I'm actually technically can also look at cosine of 300 degrees. And again, cosine, that will be my x values. Oops. So cosine will be the same thing as my x value. And my x value at 300 degrees is going to be 1/2. So cosine of 1020 is just going to be 1/2. Again, you will need to be able to understand and fill out your unit circle to get a question like this with ease without having to put this in a calculator. But that's that. The next one will be cosecant of 10 pi over 3. Cosecant, that's the same thing as 1 over our sine. So that's the same thing as 1 over our y. And I want to go ahead again and get a coterminal angle to 10 pi over 3. I can get that by subtracting 6 pi over 3, which is the same thing as subtracting 2 pi. And that would leave me with 4 pi over 3. So 1 over y, or 1 over our y value at 4 pi over 3. At 4 pi over 3, our y value there is negative root 3 over 2. So 1 divided by negative root 3 over 2. So it's just the reciprocal of that essentially. So that's going to be negative 2 over root 3. And just like letter A, I'll have to rationalize my denominator by multiplying our numerator and denominator by root 3. So my answer here will be negative 2 root 3 over 3. And then finally, for these ones, letter D, I have sine of negative 19 pi over 6. Again, we're going to look for a coterminal angle. So I'm going to go ahead and I can add not just 2 pi, but I can add 4 pi to this, which 4 pi would actually be 24 pi over 6. And then when I add that, because that'd be 2 full rotations around, that would leave me with 5 pi over 6. So sine of 5 pi over 6, again, sine is going to be my y value. So if I go ahead and I find my y value for sine at 5 pi over 6, that's going to be equal to 1/2. And again, I cannot reiterate this enough. You will need your unit circle to be able to do these questions with ease. Okay, so moving on now to our next section, we have number 12. It's just asking us to find our A, B, and D values of our graph here. A will represent our amplitude. B will represent, partially represent our period. And then D will represent our vertical shift. And that's also going to be the same thing as our midline. So let's actually start with the vertical shift. That's probably the easiest one to go ahead and find. Our midline here is halfway between 1 and -5. So halfway between that will end up being -2. So D is going to equal -2. Then I can use that midline to go ahead and find my amplitude. So from my midline to my highest point, that's going to be 3. So A will equal 3. And then lastly, I'm going to go ahead and find my B value. I get my B value from my period. So I'm going to go from one peak to another. So this is our peak here. This is a peak here. We go from 0 to pi over 2. So my period is pi over 2. And to get my B value, I'm going to go ahead and do 2 pi divided by B equals pi over 2. And then I switch that out. So I'll actually just have 2 pi divided by pi over 2 equals B, which is the same thing as 2 pi times 2 over pi. The pi's will cancel each other out, so I'm just left with 4 is equal to B. So my B value here is going to be 4. So those are my A, B, and D values on this question. Moving on, I have number 13. This is asking us to find reference angle. So a 230-degree angle, that's going to be in our third quadrant here, something around there. And again, our reference angle is an angle that's formed from our terminal side, which is this side, and our x-axis. So it will always be positive and it will always be acute. Now, if our terminating side is in the third quadrant, I can just go ahead and subtract this from 360. This minus 180. So 230 minus 180, that will give me 50 degrees. So that means my reference angle will be a 50-degree angle. Letter B, I'm going to do the same thing, except first I want to get a coterminal angle between 0 and 360 degrees. So if I subtract 360 from this, we will have 640 minus 360, which gives me 280 degrees. So 280 degrees, that is going to be in my fourth quadrant. And if that's in my fourth quadrant, I will just go ahead and do 360 minus my angle, which is 280, which will leave me with an angle of 80 degrees. So my reference angle will be this 80-degree angle right there. And for reference on the previous one, it would be this 50-degree angle right here. Moving on, I have letter C. Again, I want to get that between 0 and 2 pi because this one's in radians. So I can go ahead and subtract 18 pi here. If I was to subtract 18 pi, which is 2 pi, that would leave me with 13 pi over 9. That is going to be within my third quadrant. So that would be somewhere again in here. Now, instead of subtracting this angle minus 180, I would do this angle minus pi. So I would have 13 pi over 9 minus pi, which is the same thing as 13 pi over 9 minus 9 pi over 9, which is going to be equal to, 4 pi over 9. Again, I can do that because that's in our third quadrant. And then lastly, I have one that's negative again. So again, I want to get that between 0 and 2 pi as a coterminal angle. So I'm going to go ahead and add 36 pi to get that to be positive. So negative 29 plus 36, that will give me 7 pi over 18. And because this angle is in quadrant 1, we already know it's going to be positive, and we already know it's going to be acute because it's in the first quadrant. So that means my reference angle will be 7 pi over 9. So that's my reference angle questions. All right, moving on to our last 3 questions here. it's going to ask us to graph -2 cosine of x plus pi over 2 minus 2 for one full cycle. First, we're going to start off with our amplitude. Our first number here, which is 2. A is going to be equal to 2. Next, we have our period. Our period is indicated by our b value. That's in front of our x. We don't have anything there, so it's going to be b equals 1. So that means we have 2 pi divided by b. Again, b is 1, is equal to just 2 pi. Our period is 2 pi. So we get those two things out of the way. Phase shift, we have a minus pi over 2. If we are not a minus, a plus pi over 2. I'm getting ahead of myself here. If I have a plus inside my parentheses, we do the opposite. So usually we see plus, we usually think, oh, we're going to go right. No, we're going to go left. So that means we're going to be going left pi over 2. This is where we're going to start graphing our cosine at our reference points, okay? Lastly, we have our midline. Our midline is the same thing as our vertical shift. We're going -2. So we actually are going to be going down 2 this time. So our midline will be at y equals -2. So these are the pieces of information that we need. We're going to go ahead and get started. Again, cosine usually cosine starts at the high, middle, low, CHM. But because we have a negative at the front, we're going to go cosine. We're going to start at our low, and then we'll go to our middle. After we hit the middle, then we go back up to the high, then we go back down to our middle, and we end one cycle again at our low value. Again, because our phase shift of plus pi over 2, left pi over 2, we are going to start our x values at negative pi over 2. And then we're going to go figure out what we're going to keep adding after that. We determine how much we increase by taking our period, 2 pi, divide that by 4. That's going to be equal to pi over 2. So I add pi over 2 every single time. So negative pi over 2 plus pi over 2, 0. 0 plus pi over 2, pi over 2. Pi over 2 plus pi over 2, pi. Pi plus pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. So that would be one full period right there. Then I want to find out my y values. My lowest value, that's determined from my midline and my amplitude. If I'm at -2 as my midline, and then I go my amplitude of 2, 2 less than -2, -4. Then I go back to my midline, which is -2. Then I go 2 higher than my midline, so -2 plus 2, 0. Go back down to my midline, -2. Then I go to my low value again, -4. So I'll have all of my points here. I'm going to start just plotting. Negative pi over 2, -4. Down here, 0, -2, right here. Then I go pi over 2, 0, pi, -2, 3 pi over 2, -4. Now, do not make a v. This is a sine or a cosine function, no matter which one it is, it's going to curve. So if you make a v, don't do that. It looks ugly. So go ahead and curve this. It goes up, up, down, down. We can, even if we're going to be fancy, go ahead and continue our pattern. We know then it will go back up to our midline, which is at -2. We can go backwards. We know this is going to go back up here. It's going to be at -2 at negative pi. Then it will go up to our high value at -3 pi over 2, back down to our middle value. So we go up and back down. Again, we can follow patterns. We're smart. That would be a graph of -2 of x plus pi over 2 minus 2. All right, last two questions. We have this point, 8, -4. We're going to make a picture and then figure out our cosine, sine, tangent, and all of its reciprocals. First off, the point 8, -4, that's going to be in our fourth quadrant. So I'm only going to draw my fourth quadrant because I don't want to draw more than I need to draw. So it's going to go right 8 and then down 4. That's this point right here. Since we're making a reference angle, we go from here to here, and our reference angle is formed with our x-axis. So I essentially have this triangle here. We go down 4, so our y value on our triangle is going to be -4. Our x value is going to be 8. I can use Pythagorean theorem to get my hypotenuse. 8 squared is 64. 4 squared is 16. 64 or -4 squared is 16. 16 plus 64 gives me 80. Take the square root of that. We get root 80 as our hypotenuse. Now we just have to make all of our trig properties for that. Tangent's probably the easiest one to do in this one because we're not going to have to rationalize anything. So tangent is opposite over adjacent, which is -4 over 8. -4 over 8 simplifies down to -1 over 2. Easy. Cotangent is just that flipped. -2 over 1, which is just -2. All right, now let's get to the ones that are going to take a little bit more time to do, I guess. We have cosine first. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So 8 over root 80. Let's simplify that first and then rationalize it. Just for the sake of things, square root of 80, that's the same thing as 16 times 5, or the square root of 16 times the square root of 5. So that means root 80 is equal to 4 root 5. That will just save us a lot of time going over this in the future now. So 4 root 5, 8 over that. 8 divided by that simplifies down to 2 over root 5. Still, we got to rationalize that. So multiply the top and the bottom by root 5. So that would be 2 root 5 over 5. That's going to be our cosine. 2 root 5 over 5. Let's do the same exact thing for our sine, except now it's opposite over hypotenuse. -4 over, again, square root of 80. So I'll just right now save the time. Root 5. Cancel out. I get -1 over root 5. Rationalize my denominator. -root 5 over 5. That is going to be my sine. Now we're going to do our reciprocals. So now we're going to have root 80 over 8, which is going to be 4 root 5 over 8. Those cancel out, which will be root 5 over 2. So that's secant. And lastly, cosecant, I have 4 root 5 over -4. Those cancel out, leave me with -root 5. I'm going through this quickly, but my throat's kind of bothering right now, and I've already recorded a 60-minute video, so I'm sorry, but these are just our trig properties after we set up our reference angle. So, and then when rationalizing and simplifying square roots, it's okay. Lastly, we have a Ferris wheel problem. These things, once you do one, I feel like you can get all of them. Start off our equation here. Let's go ahead and label everything. Diameter 144, which means our radius is going to be 72, which means we have to also figure out from the middle or the center to the ground, which I think it actually tells us that it's 81, which means now we have to figure out from our base to the ground, so like right here to the ground, that's going to be 72, or 81 minus 72, which is 9. And then we have to do 9 plus 144 to get the whole entire height, which if you add this together is 153. So once you get all that stuff labeled, we can now move on to actually going ahead and writing our equation. Before that, actually, I jumped the gun. We're going to make a little graph, a little diagram. We're starting at the 9 o'clock position, which is going to be the same thing as if you look at a clock right here, 9 o'clock. We also remember move counterclockwise, and it's going to take 88 seconds to make a full rotation. So we get our intervals by dividing 88 by 4, just kind of like what we did with our period on our graph. So that would be 0, 22, 44, 66, 88. Since we're starting at the 9 o'clock position, that's going to be our middle point, which we said over here is 81, because that's 9 plus 72, so 81. Our lowest point is going to be 9, because that's where they get on at the bottom here. And then our highest point is 153. So at 0, again, it's 9 o'clock. I'll do it in a different color to help us see. We'll be at 81. Because we're going counterclockwise, then we're going to hit the lowest point at 22 seconds. Then we go back up to our middle point. Then we go up to our highest point at 66, and then back down to our middle point. So we make a nice graph that looks something like that. Again, because we start at the middle, we've talked about this before, this is going to be a sine. But because we're in the middle and going down, it's going to be a negative sign. Because usually sines go middle, high. Sines go middle and then high, SMH. But instead, because we're going middle low, SML, it's going to be a negative sign. So now we go ahead, we're going to tie everything together. We have y is equal to, it's negative like we said before. Then our amplitude will be the same thing always as the radius of our Ferris wheel, because that's how high we go up, how low we go down from that middle point. This case, we said our radius, it's 72, so negative 72. Then we have sine. We still have to find our b value. Our b value is, like we always do, we take our 88, which is our period, 2 pi divided by b equals 88. Switch those out. That will be the same thing as 2 pi divided by 88, which will also give us pi over 44. So then we go ahead and we have pi over 44 x, and then our last thing we're going to do is add our phase shift, which is our vertical shift, which is our midline. We see our midline here, it's 81. So we have plus 81, and that's our function here for our Ferris wheel. The only thing that changes here is, in any of those questions of Ferris wheel, will be whether if it's a sine, a cosine, it's a sine, it's positive or negative, a cosine, positive or negative. If it's a sine, it will start at either 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, because those are the two middle points. If it's a positive sign, it will be 3 o'clock because it goes up after. If it's a negative sign, it will be 9 o'clock because it goes down after. If it's a positive cosine, it will start at our high value, so it will start at the top. If it's a negative cosine, it will start at our bottom value. That's the only thing that really is going to change here. And then also, again, like I said, your period might change, your 2 pi divided by b. That's the only other thing that changes. Lastly, we got to match these points here onto this graph down here and then follow our pattern. So F is where it starts and it's high and it goes down low after. That would be this point up here, which is going to be 66, 153. Then it goes down. We have G on this graph as well. That's 88, 81. Now, look. Oh no, we don't have our next however many points on the graph, so I have to follow my pattern. This is our low value. We know that it's going to be 9. Now we just have to figure out what our x value is going to be. We know we're increasing by increments of 22 seconds, so 22 plus 88, that's 110. Then we go back up to the middle. 110 plus 22, 132. We already know our middle value is 81. Add another 22, that's 154, and that's 153 because we go ahead and that's our high value. And that's everything on our test review. If you watch this whole thing, it's 22 minutes. I'm proud of you. If you have any questions about anything, email me. If not, good luck on your test tomorrow. And if you watch this video, again, I'm proud of you.